Okay, so are you feeling buried under credit card debt with no end in sight? With debt at an all-time high and missed payments piling up, it's easy to feel like you'll never break free. But what if there was a simple strategy that didn't just help you pay off your debt, but also gave you quick wins to keep you motivated along the way? In this episode, we're going to be diving into a powerful method that uses psychology to help you crush your debt for good, one small win at a time. And if you're curious how it works, tune into this episode and we're going to share. Hey guys, I'm Brett Nelson, founder of Debt Free Dad. I paid off about $45,000 of debt, have been debt free now for more than 11 years outside of my mortgage. We've also been fortunate to help thousands of other people save and pay off tens of millions of dollars with the work that we do here at Debt Free Dad.
And I'm Amber Taylor, and we paid off and saved $54,000 in 20 months and have been living debt-free outside of our mortgage since 2018.
And I am Chris Hawkins, and my wife and I started our journey way back in 2005. And from 2005 to 2008, we paid off just under $100,000 of debt and have been debt-free ever since.
And my name is Ryan. My wife and I paid off $160,000 in debt while we were raising 3 kids.
Now, guys, after listening to this episode, if you want to take your finances a step further, you like to get better results and start seeing these results in as little as 30 to 60 days, I'll be sharing some details about how you can get started with that later on in today's show. So, guys, in today's conversation, we're going to be revealing this really powerful tool. We have brought it up several times here on the podcast, but we really wanted to dive in and just focus on it for you guys who are looking for a way to get started. But before we do that, I want to just read some quick statistics from a recent article about credit card debt from Experian.com. And the article is titled, Credit Card Debt Hits a New High with Delinquencies Rising. It says American consumers carry a combined nearly $1.2 trillion in credit card debt, according to a quarter 2 2024 data from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. That's a new record high and an increase of $111 billion from just a year ago, which is an 11% increase. In contrast, consumer spending increased by just 5.2%, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, indicating that recent high interest rates are a significant driver of ballooning balances. As debt numbers have increased, so have delinquencies. The bank reported that 9.1% of credit card balances have transitioned into delinquency over the past year, meaning that borrowers have missed at least one payment by 30 days or more. What's more, 7.18% of balances are behind by at least 90 days, a 41% increase from just a year ago. I'm not shocked by these numbers. I think, we're going to talk about this tool, but any feedback on that? Did it surprise you with, do we blame inflation on that, or where do you think these delinquencies are happening?
I think they've always been happening. Maybe inflation's made it slightly worse, but we have traditionally seen, you mentioned credit card debt. It's gone up almost every year with the exception of maybe 2 years there during COVID. And so this is, to me, an ongoing epidemic of using debt to finance your lifestyle. So I think it's not shocking, and it's only going to continue to go up over time.
Yeah, do I think inflation plays a part in it? Sure. I will say that inflation plays a part in these numbers. The reality, though, for me, and I've seen this in my own debt journey, is the reason for it is because we weren't preparing for this before it happened, right? If inflation and all these things happen, the rising costs of everything were happening the way that it is now when I was in debt, I would be part of those statistics. My credit card debt would be rising because that was the only way I could have paid for things. That's the way I was financing my lifestyle. I wasn't preparing for something that bad was going to happen like that. So does it contribute? Yes. Is it the reason? And I think that's where I think a lot of us get confused, or a lot of people like to point the finger and say, that's the reason that I have to use my credit card. And the real reason you have to use your credit card is most likely because you weren't a good saver and you weren't doing the right things before all this happened. And now you're having to just rely on it more than what even you used to.
Yeah. Well, today, guys, we're going to be sharing this tool. And I think it's unanimous here on this show. This is probably, I think, all of our favorite tools. But can you guys share, before we talk about the one we like, were there a couple of different ways you tried prior to using this method that we're going to talk about here today? Like, I know for me, I tried the whole consolidation thing, tried even doing like a HELOC, taking money out of my home that I owned at the time and paying off debt that way, which really wasn't really paying it off. It was just moving it around, credit card balance transfers and things like that. But, or, you know, sometimes you'd pay a little bit more on each account, trying to pay them off that way. But none of that really seemed to kind of work for me.
Yeah, we did the consolidation. We pulled it all together, you know, put a car in there, put our credit cards in there. And I was like, hey, that's it. The credit cards are at zero. We're not touching it anymore. Well, the credit cards racked back up to max.
Until you did, yeah.
It did not work.
In terms of consolidation, we tried that as well and found ourselves with more debt after we consolidated for the exact same reason. So when we talk about this on the show, we've been there, done that. And so we're telling you firsthand, if you try to consolidate your debt as a means of making things feel better, being able to get the monkey off your back, not going to happen.
Well, it felt good for a minute.
A minute, okay.
Right? Yeah.
And the only thing I'd add to that is we're not, I would say I'm not 100% against consolidation, but you have got to like fix all of your behaviors and fix the reason why that doesn't work, because we same thing. I mean, we consolidated so many times, it never worked. But once we fixed our broken ways of handling money, there was a point where we did consolidate and it worked great. But you have to get to that point, and we were never to that point. It was like what Amber's, it was just that quick fix, that feeling of, oh, feels so good. And then boom, you're right back to spending in a short amount of time.
Can I play devil's advocate here?
Yeah.
I agree 100%. Get to the point where you can manage your money, get to the point where you know what's coming in, what's going out, that you have a game plan. But by the time you execute that enough, that consolidation becomes an option. I would argue, heck, you're close enough to just finishing as it is. And so as a devil's advocate here, I'm not sure that consolidation would have, for most people, would speed things up that much, is my point.
Yep.
So let's talk about the method that we all love and the method that we think is probably the most successful in getting out of debt, and it's called the Debt Snowball Method. So in your guys' opinion, now I use this, obviously this is what we teach, this is what we share. It's been around for a long time. But what are some of your guys' favorite parts about the snowball?
There's a specific purpose behind putting the lowest balance first. I've been there, tried the other method, and it doesn't work. And for anybody to call you stupid for trying it this way, or they just don't know what they're talking about themselves, you've got to work your plan. You've got to execute what your goals are. And I believe deep down that the method of the debt snowball that we're going to share here is going to work better than any other version.
Right. Well, I think that's where people argue it, is that the math doesn't lie, because it doesn't. I mean, if you look at the avalanche method, could it potentially save you more in interest if you did it that way? Yeah, mathematically, probably, but not every time. It depends. But I think you might find that you'll be coming out more even as it is, because I think what most people do with the avalanche, at least I did, because I tried that method too, where you're like, okay, I'm going to attack the highest interest credit card. Well, my highest interest credit card, one of my biggest credit card bills was, like $8,000 or $9,000. And it's like, it would take me so long. What happened is you just burn out and you quit. And so I think that's where the motivation, it basically just ends in a lot of cases. And that's why I think people get burned out with that avalanche.
So mathematically, in a perfect world, yes, you would pay less interest.
Correct. Yep.
Over time. But if you don't finish and you stay in debt for the rest of your life, you're going to pay a whole lot more in interest.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the part that they miss. It's like, but you're looking at it in perfect world. Perfect world, people don't follow it perfectly.
Well, life doesn't go 100% perfect according to plan. If it did, you probably wouldn't be in debt. I wouldn't have been in debt. None of us would have been in debt. We wouldn't be here talking about this.
Yeah. Yeah, totally agree. So share real quick, what are some of your guys' favorite parts about it? Obviously, Chris, you kind of alluded to it, the psychology behind it. I think for me, it's just, it's getting those quick and easy wins. And by focusing on that, on the debt snowball where you list your debts, and we're going to kind of go through this step by step, guys, from here in just a minute, but you basically, will list your debts smallest to largest by balance owed instead of interest rates. And I think for me, it was like paying off that smallest debt first. That felt great. Like I wasn't making any progress at all in getting out of debt, saving money. But when I finally built that first emergency fund and then was able to pay down a debt, it's like, we actually can do this. And I think that was a game changer for me. It actually made it seem possible.
So you talk about the quick win.
Yeah.
I would imagine everybody out there listening who has debts, you probably have one debt that the balance is so small that if you really put your mind and time and effort to it, you could probably pay that off within a month, 2 months at most. Right? Everybody's got one of those debts that's so low balance-wise that you can accomplish that. And maybe that's your only goal. And that's the thing I like about the debt snowball as it's described here, is that quick, easy victory, like you mentioned. You've all got one. All right. When you gain that confidence, like anything else in life, that light bulb moment, it helps you realize I can do this. And it helps you realize that, hey, that next debt, which probably doesn't have that much more of a balance than the first one, is certainly achievable. And at the end of the day, if you pay off that first debt, this is what I like about this. You at least have paid something off, as opposed to the other method. If it's the highest balance that you have, you may not ever get it paid off.
Well, if you're anything like me, not being in control of something is very hard for me. Paying that first one just gave me that sense of control back. Like, oh my gosh, I got this. I can do this. And then paying off the next one and the next one. Like at some point in this debt snowball, I was almost gamifying it at that point because I'm like, I could do this. And it just gave me that sense of control back, which, I mean, the wins were great. I was celebrating. It was awesome. But that control, man, wow, that was big.
Well, and I think, I mean, for us, it was just, we were diluting our efforts so much. And I think that's the snowball for us, is just, it was just rewiring our brains that you don't, you know, we had 5 or 6 credit card bills. You know, we were always of the mindset of we're going to pay a little bit more than what we owed on each one. And it kind of just made us feel like, oh, we're making a dent in all of them, but we never really were. And I think we just had to rewire our brain to say, okay, we're going to stop doing that. And we're not going to do that on 5 of them. And we're going to put all that, even if it was like a lot of times when we were paying extra, we're not talking like tons extra. It was like 25 or 30 bucks a month. Well, if you have 5 or 6 bills that you're doing that with, I mean, that's $180, $150, $180 that you can put towards that smallest bill. And it's like when we rewired and started doing that, it was like, whoa, kind of like you, Amber. It was like, oh, like I have more money than I think, because we weren't even thinking about it. We were just thinking we're making progress on all of them. And when we just focused on one, man, we really could make some progress.
And so, Amber, you mentioned the word gamify, and that's exactly what I did. I looked at my next debt and said, okay, it's $500 left to pay it off. And every dollar is a point. How do I come up with 500 points? And I treated that debt like it was one game in a season. And all of my debts were a whole season. And so I had to get through one game to be able to get to the next game. Okay. That's one way that I gamified it. The other one was I looked at the total amount and said, okay, it was like 95,000 roughly. I don't have to come up with $95,000. I have to come out with, $100 950 times. And it seemed much more manageable that way to gamify it. So I love that word, Amber.
Well, and I think gamifying it also creates like the momentum, or it creates that confidence that we don't have. Any sort of action, like Ryan, you said, you pay off small debt or you focused on a small debt. Any sort of action creates results, and those results create confidence. And obviously the more results that you get, the more confidence you get, the more momentum you get. And I think that's really the real secret sauce behind this snowball. And we've had so many members who have done this, where they say, like Amber, you said, gamify it, or it almost becomes like addicting. Like I'm getting so addicted, it's becoming almost fun. And people say that, like fun to pay off debt, because they start to feel that confidence and that momentum.
Who knew the word fun would be associated with paying off debt?
But that's exactly how I felt. Okay.
Yeah.
You can add me to that list. There came a point at which, okay, listen, how can I come up with more money to pay this next debt off? And every decision about how to spend money came down to, is it worth spending money for that, or worth buying points in this game? That's sort of how I looked at it. And the further I got into it, the more competitive I became with myself. And it was fun. It was a lot of fun once it got going.
All right, guys. So let's talk about how we set this up. So we're just going to kind of go step by step. So first, you just can take any piece of paper. In fact, we give out our Debt Snowball worksheet in our Life Without Payments workshop. So if you want to go on our website, go under tools on the website. You'll see the Life Without Payments workshop there. We have the worksheet there. It has the instructions in it. So if you want that, sign up for the workshop. You're also going to get a great workshop with it too, but also you get this Debt Snowball worksheet to kind of do this work that we're talking about here today. But first, you want to list all of your debts. So write out all of them. And this is probably maybe the most overwhelming part of the whole process, is really tallying up how much total debt that you have. And can you guys talk about when you guys did this for the first time? I remember when I did it for the first time, it's like, okay, it's as bad as I thought it was, and it feels really crappy.
It just makes it real. It made it real for us.
Yeah.
For me, it was more about, I knew how much we owed. That wasn't necessarily a surprise. When it came to budgeting and going back and looking at where we spent money and how we were spending money, that was the old punch in the gut.
Yeah, and I would just say this was a exercise that is easy to pretend is not as bad as it is. What I mean by that is, like, it's easy to just kind of sit down quickly and be like, oh yeah, and I owe this, and oh, that's what I owe. But then you're really not taking into account, like, oh, I owe money on my car. Oh, I owe money on that other car. Oh, I owe money on, you're not really processing it. So like for me, like when we say list all your debts, like really take your time and go through everything. The feeling sucks. I don't think we've ever found anybody that was like, oh, I did it and I feel so great. I mean, everybody I think feels just absolutely terrible, and it's a gut punch. But it's also the first step in, like what Amber said earlier, of like taking control. If you do this kind of, you don't take it seriously and you kind of do it, it's because we did that a couple of times. We just tried to avoid, because we didn't really want to see the whole number. We wanted to see the stuff I was willing to take responsibility for, but I didn't want to see the rest of it. So you got to really sit down and write down so you have the exact amount that you owe on everything. I
want to point out here, because I've heard this question a lot of times from people. You say list all of your debts. Well, I think if I'm correct here, what we're meaning by that is every debt, car, student loan, credit card, etc., with the exception of a mortgage if you have one. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And includes personal loans too. Just because you're not owing interest to your mom, it still counts.
Yeah.
Yes.
Everything. Yep. Make sure you list everything. And then make sure when you list that debt, obviously you want to make sure you understand what all the minimum payments are for those debts, because you're going to list that along with it. And then what the point of the debt snowball is then you're going to make all of your payments, all the minimum payments, except for that first smallest debt. And you're going to basically attack that thing with absolute intensity to pay it off as fast as possible. And the cool part is for a lot of us, we have this low-hanging fruit that's out there, like we've all talked about. We have this small debt. We all have these little tiny debts that are out there. And it feels really good to get that first debt paid off. In fact, I think when I first started, I think I paid off the first 2 or 3 debts within the first 2 months. And paying off 3 accounts was awesome to be able to check that stuff off.
Yeah, and there's less on your snowball at that point.
Right.
The more you pay off your debts, the easier to some degree the rewriting or the managing of the debt snowball becomes.
Yeah, so once you pay off that first small debt, then you're going to essentially take that minimum payment from the first debt and roll it into the second debt on your list. So let's say, for instance, to make math easy, your first debt had a minimum payment of $25. Your second debt has a minimum payment of $25. Well, being that you already paid off the first one, you're going to take that $25 you normally would have been paying on the first one, you're going to roll that into the second one, paying now $50. But the key to the debt snowball and making it work faster is also having, a really good budget and taking any extra money that you have and put even more on top of that $50 payment. So you're paying it down, and you're increasing the speed of how fast you're paying down some of these debts by focusing on just that next debt while making the minimum payments on the others.
Yeah, and really where you'll start seeing the compounding differences in this is typically your bigger debts. Like, you start small to gain momentum and to gain, like, okay, I can do this. It makes you want to do the next one. But typically as you get to your next debts, they're usually higher minimum payments. They're usually $100, $200, $300. Well, once you pay that off, now you're not rolling $25 over. You're rolling $200 or $300 into that next debt. And so you pay that one off, and now you're rolling, okay, that $200 or $300. Maybe your next debt was also $200 or $300. Now, when that one's paid off, you're rolling potentially, $500 to $600 into the next debt. So the more you do this, it just compounds on itself, and it makes it go that much faster.
Right. Well, and I think it also gives you a lot of people always have the question of, Brad, I got a sum of money. Maybe it was a tax return or inheritance or a bonus at work. And they're always like, well, what should I do with that money? Well, if you're working the plan that we talk about here, you already know the answer. You're going to take that lump sum of money and you're going to focus on your smallest debt that you're working on. And I think that's the cool part about this is that when you get these extra, because we all see that, whether it's, like I said, a tax return or a bonus or something like that comes into our hands, you can now take that money and make tremendous headway in paying down debt because you have a plan that you're working on. As opposed to, when I used to get windfalls, no, I wasn't paying off any debt. I was spending it, right? But when you get motivated, you want to just pile more and more on that debt.
It's funny how your mindset shifts as soon as you start doing this, and then the behavior changes and you're focused on it. And when a windfall comes like that, you're like, yeah, no, I don't need the toy that I was thinking about. I want to pay this off.
Yeah, it's like I can knock 4 out of 7 debts off the list. Wow. That's over 50% of it, at least visually. I want to point out one other thing here, and I'm not sure where this goes in the list, but for many folks, when you do your debt snowball, there is probably going to be 1, 2, 3 car payments in there somewhere. And car payments are designed from the very beginning to have a set payoff date. You make X number of payments, X amount of dollars for X number of months, and it's paid off. And many times, at least my experience, is the car payments are going to be some of the ones lower on the list. And so while you're making that minimum or required payment on that car loan, you are gradually paying that balance off. And so when you get to that point where maybe the car loans are the last couple of things left on the list, you don't have as much to pay off as you perhaps thought you would when you get there, because the balance has reduced itself. And when you get to that point, you're probably going to find that you can pay that off much faster than you originally thought.
All right, guys. So the Debt Snowball Method isn't just about the numbers. It's about creating a system that helps you stay motivated and empowered on your journey to becoming debt-free. And by focusing on just the small, quick wins, you'll build momentum and confidence, which are the key to sticking to this for the long-term plan. So guys, as we mentioned, if you want to pay off debt, if you want to save more money, if you want to take better control of your finances and start seeing some amazing results, and seriously, guys, just as little as 30 to 60 days, all you have to do is head over to debtfreedad.com, click on the green button at the top of the page, and I'm going to show you how you can get started. Thanks for joining us on today's show, and we will see you guys on the next episode.